It began with a wound in reality, a silver fracture across the endless dark. The stars bent inward, their light swallowed by the screaming edge of the rift. The warp itself recoiled, its chaotic tides twisting around the anomaly like frightened beasts. Something alien was breaking through, something the Imperium had never seen. From the depths of that wound came light, not the holy gold of the Emperor's flame, nor the crimson glare of chaos, but a cold, perfect silver. It shimmered like a mirror tearing itself apart. And through it fell a figure, wrapped in stillness and ruin, wings of shadow folded close, his presence distorting the very fabric of space around him. The warp howled, and even the demons paused. This was no god, no mortal, no creature born of this galaxy's madness. His descent carried purpose, not accident. His body burned like a comet, yet his expression was calm, detached, as though he had simply chosen to step from one universe into another. Through the storm the glint of a blade appeared, impossibly long, impossibly sharp, catching the dim light of dying stars. The Masamune, a weapon that had seen gods fall and worlds burn, now whispered through the void of Warhammer's grim eternity. The rift shuddered behind him, screaming like a wounded cosmos, and then sealed shut, as if the universe itself feared to leave that door open. The warp quieted. Silence fell. He drifted in the black between systems, surrounded by the echo of his arrival. His silver hair floated like strands of starlight. His eyes, bright, inhuman green, reflected the galaxies ahead. He did not speak. He did not breathe. He only looked upon this strange, ancient cosmos and smiled faintly, not summoned, not called, but drawn by something vast, unseen, older than destiny itself. And in that moment, the 41st millennium changed forever. For where Sephiroth walks, the stars remember. The silence of the void broke as Sephiroth descended through a storm of fire and smoke. Below him stretched a world that burned without pause, continents shattered by orbital bombardment, oceans turned to steam, skies black with the ashes of billions. Cities of steel and devotion clawed toward the heavens, their cathedrals half crumbled, their banners still proclaiming faith in a god who no longer answered. He hovered above the ruins, the heat of atomic fire curling harmlessly around him. Across the horizon, machine and flesh clashed in endless fury. Titans walked through the wreckage, their cannons hurling suns at one another. Squads of soldiers in black and gold armor shouted prayers as they charged into certain death. The air itself trembled with the sound of worship and slaughter woven into one. Sephiroth could feel it, the pulse of this universe beating beneath the carnage. It was a rhythm of rage and despair, an endless dirge that had replaced hope. Every scream, every explosion, every dying breath whispered the same truth. There was no peace here, no redemption, only survival, only war. His eyes narrowed. The psychic noise of billions of terrified minds pressed against his own, an ocean of madness that made even the live stream seem quiet by comparison. The warp brushed against his thoughts, tasting his power and recoiling, uncertain whether to consume or revere him. He landed lightly on the twisted hull of a fallen gunship. Around him lay the remains of the faithful, soldiers of the Imperium, their bodies broken yet still clutching their holy sigils. One whispered a prayer through blood-filled lungs. Sephiroth listened, and for the first time he sensed what ruled this place, not reason, not compassion, but belief forged into iron. He lifted his gaze to the burning heavens. Massive ships orbited the planet, their silhouettes like drifting cathedrals. They rained destruction in the name of salvation. The irony almost made him laugh. "This is not Gaia," he murmured. His voice was calm, echoing against the storm. "This is a graveyard built by gods and their slaves." The wind carried his words through the smoke. He could feel eyes watching him, mortal and divine alike, trying to understand what had arrived among them. This was the 41st millennium, a realm where hope was a myth and death a language. And into its endless war, Sephiroth had fallen like a forgotten prophecy. The air around him began to shimmer, not with heat, but with something far more alive. Reality bent, trembling like glass under pressure. The ground beneath his feet pulsed faintly, as if the very world recognized that something unnatural had entered its bloodstream. Then came the whispers. At first, they were faint, a soft murmur at the edge of hearing, like wind through broken cathedrals. But soon they grew louder, layered voices overlapping in a chorus of madness. Each word carried hunger, curiosity, and a strange kind of reverence. The warp had noticed him. Its unseen tides rolled over him like waves of fire and ice. He could feel it probing him, tasting the edges of his mind, searching for weakness, for fear, for the smallest opening to claim him as its own. But there was no fear. There never had been, only calm and power. Images flickered in his mind, cities devoured by demons, mortals sacrificing their souls for the promise of strength, gods of excess and rage demanding worship. The warp tried to impress its dominion upon him. It showed him visions of its might, of worlds it had drowned in madness. Sephiroth only watched. He let the chaos surround him, let the storms scream in his ears, and then he smiled. A slow, knowing smile that made even the warp hesitate. "So," he whispered, his voice carrying through both matter and immaterium, "this universe knows fear too." The voices faltered. The psychic winds recoiled as though something cold and ancient had cut through them. For the first time, the warp, the endless ocean of emotion and corruption, felt uncertainty. Because what it touched within Sephiroth was not mortal darkness. It was something deeper, a perfect, still void, ambition without end, rage without chaos, destruction without insanity. He was not a creature born of the warp's madness. He was a mirror of it, refined, focused, absolute. Lightning split the sky, green and violet arcs tearing across the clouds. Demons began to stir at the edges of reality, drawn by the scent of this new presence. Their forms flickered, malformed and eager, yet none dared cross the veil. Sephiroth lifted his gaze toward the storm above. His hair whipped in the ether wind, his eyes reflecting the madness that now feared him. "So, this is your chaos," he said quietly. "I have seen worse within myself." And with that thought, the warp, infinite and hungry, shivered. High above the burning world, an inquisitorial vessel drifted through the void, a cathedral forged into a warship, its hull carved with prayers and purity seals. Within its shadowed command chamber, the air thrummed with the cold hum of machine spirits. Dozens of augur screens flickered to life, each one tracing the impossible readings coming from the planet below. "Confirm that signal," snapped the Inquisitor. His voice cut through the chamber like a blade. Servitors clicked and whirred, their eyes glowing with green data streams. "Anomaly detected. Energy pattern inconsistent with known psychic signatures. Power output unquantifiable." The Inquisitor leaned forward, his scarred face lit by the shifting glow of the hollow display. "Human? No," he muttered, narrowing his eyes. "Something wearing the shape of one." He straightened, his ornate armor catching the dim light of the lumen globes. "Prepare a containment strike, no matter what it is. It will answer to the Inquisition." But it was already too late. Outside the ship, in the vast silence of orbit, The anomaly moved. Sephiroth's body gleamed faintly against the black, descending not through the pull of gravity but through will alone. The void bent beneath his presence. Debris, dust, even the thin air of the upper atmosphere rippled around him, as if creation itself acknowledged its new master. On the ship's sensors, the readings spiked to impossible levels. "He's walking through re-entry," whispered a junior officer. Flames licked across the outer hull of the anomaly, but the figure within was untouched. The computer's systems began to fail one by one, logic collapsing under the weight of the impossible. Through the viewport, the Inquisitor watched. A silhouette of silver light drifted down through the burning clouds. A man, tall, lean, his long hair trailing behind him like a comet's tail. In one hand, a blade so long it looked like a shard of moonlight itself. "By the throne," breathed the officer. The Inquisitor's jaw clenched. "That is no man." He turned sharply. "Signal every ground asset. Deploy psycho containment units, full sanction. Nothing of that power walks free." Yet Sephiroth was already descending, far beyond their reach. He passed through the planet's upper atmosphere as though gravity itself had bowed in reverence. The flames of entry wrapped around him like a silver cloak. His eyes glowed faintly, reflecting the planet's broken surface below. He felt the Inquisitor's gaze from orbit, felt the fear that travelled with it. And he smiled, not out of cruelty, but amusement. In every universe, there were always those who believed they could control what they did not understand. The Inquisitor's orders filled the ship's Vox channels. "Mark that world for observation. We are witnessing an incursion unlike any before. Should it spread—" He hesitated. "We will call exterminatus." But Sephiroth never looked back. His descent continued, steady, serene, a fallen angel crossing through flame and smoke. And far below, the war-torn world waited to meet its newest god. Through the storm and flame, Sephiroth descended, not falling, but gliding, each motion deliberate, graceful, inevitable. The last of the burning clouds parted around him, and the war-scarred world spread out below like a corpse beneath a shroud of smoke. Mountains lay split open, rivers boiled into vapor, and what had once been cities now stood as skeletons of twisted metal and ash. He landed without sound, the air stilled. Dust rose, hung suspended for a heartbeat, and then drifted aside as if the planet itself dared not touch him. Around him stretched a plain of wreckage, the remains of a shattered imperial fortress, its banners half melted, its statues of saints toppled into the mud. The scent of promethium and blood lingered heavy. From the ruins, movement. A squad of Imperial guardsmen stumbled through the debris, armor scorched, faces hidden behind cracked visors. They froze when they saw him, a lone figure standing calm amidst ruin, hair silver as moonlight, eyes like green fire. For a moment they hesitated, then training overcame fear. "Target acquired! Fire!" The air erupted with gunfire. Bolts screamed through the smoke. Lasfire flared like starlight. Grenades thundered against the ground. Yet every bullet slowed, every explosion dulled, as though the world itself refused to strike him. The storm of metal bent away, bullets falling harmlessly into the dust at his feet. Sephiroth's hand moved just once. The Masamune flashed, and the sound that followed was not steel, but silence. The soldiers stopped firing. For a heartbeat, none understood why. Then their weapons fell apart, sliced cleanly in two, their barrels cooling in the dirt. He walked forward. Each step echoed, light and measured, through the smoke. One of the guardsmen, trembling, whispered a prayer to the Emperor. Sephiroth paused beside him, glancing down. There was no malice in his eyes, only a detached curiosity, as if he were observing a species on the edge of extinction. "Faith," he murmured, "your shield against the inevitable." The soldier tried to speak, but the sound never came. The air shimmered again, a faint ripple that passed through everything, and the man simply fell, his body untouched, his mind erased. Sephiroth turned his gaze to the horizon. Fires burned where artillery still thundered, where men and machines fought and died for gods who never answered. He could feel the planet's pain beneath his boots, the endless suffering echoing through the crust, through the warp beyond. It called to him, a world begging to be silenced. Above, the black sky rumbled. Lightning crawled across the clouds like veins of light in a dying heart. He closed his eyes and breathed in the chaos, tasting iron, ash, and despair. "This world trembles," he said softly, "and still it prays." He lifted Masamune, its blade catching the reflection of firelight and stars alike. With a motion as fluid as wind, he drove it into the earth. Energy rippled outward, spreading in circles of pale silver light. The ground steadied. The guns in the distance fell silent. Even the storm seemed to hesitate. And in that stillness, the kind of silence that only comes before catastrophe, Sephiroth stood alone among the dead and whispered, almost kindly, "Rest. Your war is over." But far above him, in the cold darkness of orbit, the Inquisition's ships had not stopped watching. Sensors flared once more, vox channels filled with urgent voices. The anomaly lives. And so the galaxy began to turn its gaze upon the angel who had touched the ground. As Sephiroth stood upon the scorched plain, the silence broke again, not with mortal sound, but with the deep, endless murmur of the warp itself. The veil between realities had thinned around him, bending under the weight of his presence. From that unseen ocean of madness came the voices, ancient, hungry, eternal. They spoke in tongues older than time, words that could bend minds and ignite souls. Yet to him, they were clear. Tzeentch, the architect of fate, was the first to stir. His laughter echoed like shifting glass, 1,000 truths twisting into lies. "Beautiful anomaly," he whispered, "you who slipped through time's cracks. Join me. Let us reshape causality itself. With your will and my design, no destiny shall remain unbroken." Sephiroth's eyes half closed. He saw visions. Galaxies turned inside out, timelines rewriting themselves at his command. Temptation flickered, but only for a moment. He had seen such illusions before, promises of order hiding cages of control. Then came Slaanesh, voice smooth as silk and venom. "Why seek conquest when you could feel eternity? Every moment, every breath, every soul that worships you could be pleasure beyond comprehension. I can make you a god of beauty, a living perfection." For the briefest instant, the air shimmered with a soft, silver light. Slaanesh's attempt to shape his image into an angel of adoration. Sephiroth did not even blink. The illusion shattered. "Perfection," he murmured. "I have seen what becomes of those who chase it. They rot beneath the weight of their desire." The warp roared, offended. Then a voice thundered through the void. Raw, violent, drenched in blood, Khorne. "Enough of whispers. You are war-given flesh. Take my hand, and I will make you a god of slaughter. Together we will drown the stars in blood." A crimson tide surged before him, visions of burning worlds and endless carnage. But Sephiroth merely smiled, not in amusement, but pity. "You mistake control for strength," he said softly. "Rage without reason is just noise." Even Nurgle, the grandfather of decay, stirred from his festering garden. his laughter like a choking cough. "You will tire, child. All things do. When you fall, I will welcome you. I will give you peace." Peace. The word hung for a moment. Sephiroth tilted his head, studying the storm around him. "Peace is not your gift to give," he said. "It is mine to take." The warp shuddered. The whispers faded, replaced by a long, low hiss of frustration. Sound of gods denied. Their attention drew back, yet their eyes lingered. He had defied them all without raising a hand. And in that defiance, something changed. The currents of the warp no longer sought to consume him. They began to orbit him, subtly drawn to his presence. Where other mortals were drowned by its chaos, Sephiroth bent it to silence. The demons watching from the rift hissed in confusion, uncertain whether he was prey or predator. He stood at the center of the storm, his coat flowing like liquid night, Masamune gleaming faintly in the dim light. His eyes glowed brighter, not with arrogance, but with calm understanding. "Even gods tremble," he said, his voice carrying through the Imperium. "And somewhere, far across the galaxy, the greatest among them, the chaos." Gods themselves paused their eternal war for one fleeting moment. Because something had entered their dominion that they could not twist, could not tempt, could not break, a will stronger than theirs. Sephiroth turned his gaze upward. The sky bled light, the whispers died, the warp itself held its breath. Far above the planet's surface, within the vaulted steel sanctum of the inquisitorial flagship, alarms screamed, vox channels crackled with overlapping prayers and panicked reports. Servitors chanted Binharic hymns, their monotone voices struggling to calm machine spirits that no longer obeyed. The Inquisitor stood at the center of it all, framed by towering stained glass panels depicting saints slaying demons. Yet even those holy images seemed to tremble in his presence. His armor was etched with sigils of warding, his rosette glimmering faintly beneath the red lights. He had seen Xenos horrors, demonic incursions, even the madness of the warp itself. But never this. "Reconfirm the readings," he ordered. His voice was hard, but beneath the steel lay something human. Unease. "Confirmed, my lord," replied the tech adept, his mechanical voice faltering. "The anomaly continues to move across the surface without measurable propulsion. Energy output exceeds classification. Psychic interference has increased by 300%. Auspex cannot maintain lock." The Inquisitor turned toward the main viewport. Through the haze of cloud and fire, the sensors caught glimpses of him. The lone figure walking among the ruins, serene amid destruction. Every time the scanners tried to focus, the image distorted as if reality itself refused to define him. "What is he?" whispered one of the officers. The Inquisitor's gaze did not waver. "Not what," he said coldly. "When?" He knew the signs. Beings like this did not appear by accident. The warp was a liar, but it did not conjure such precision. This creature had purpose, a focus sharper than any demon's hunger, and that made him infinitely more dangerous. He gestured sharply. "Prepare the Death Watch. Deploy all available psychers. I want containment fields primed, and strike teams on the ground within the hour." "My lord." The officer hesitated, voice cracking. "Psychers are reporting visions. They say the anomaly speaks to them. They claim to see..." Silence. The Inquisitor's gauntlet slammed onto the console. Sparks leapt from the metal. "This thing will not take root here. If it is a weapon of chaos, we will burn it. If it is a god, we will kill it." Below them, lightning split the atmosphere, and for a heartbeat the figure looked up, directly at the ship. Every lumen flickered. Vox feeds turned to static. For one impossible second, every soul aboard felt seen. The Inquisitor froze, his breath caught in his throat. That gaze, calm, knowing, and infinitely deep, pierced the layers of his mind like a knife through parchment. He felt his faith tremble, not from doubt in the Emperor, but from understanding. This was not a daemon, this was something greater. Then the power surge ended, the lights returned, the ship stabilized. But in that silence, the Inquisitor's heart still pounded. He turned slowly toward his staff. "Transmit to Terra," he ordered, his voice low and cold. "Mark this world as exterminatus potential, and pray, my brothers, pray that the Emperor is watching." On the planet below, Sephiroth continued to walk through fire and ruin, unaware, or perhaps unconcerned, that the most feared hand of the Imperium now trembled because of him. Above, in the cold dark, the Inquisitor's eyes lingered on the image of that silver figure one last time. And though he would never admit it, not even under oath to the throne, he whispered the word that none in the Imperium dared associate with fear. Angel. Night fell upon the dying world, though its skies were already blackened long before. Fires burned like candles in a graveyard, their light swallowed by the endless ash. Amidst that ruin, Sephiroth walked alone, silent, unhurried, his silver hair stirring in the hot winds that carried the scent of death. Everywhere he stepped, the world seemed to listen. The ground no longer shook from bombardment. It pulsed faintly, in rhythm with his movement, as though some forgotten heartbeat had awakened beneath the crust. He stopped at the edge of a canyon carved by orbital fire. The sky above still shimmered with faint auroras, the dying residue of psychic storms unleashed by the Imperium's last desperate battle. Sephiroth looked up at them, and something in their chaos called to him. He raised a hand, fingers brushing the air. The warp stirred in response. It was not like magic, nor the materia he once knew. It was alive, an ocean of thought and hunger stretching beyond time. When he reached into it, it reached back, curious and wary, uncertain if it was the master or the servant. He felt the whispers again, faint now, subdued after their failure to corrupt him. But beneath them ran something deeper, a hum beneath existence itself, the echo of creation and destruction intertwined. He closed his eyes and listened. The sound was not music, yet it resonated like a song, a harmony built from the frequencies of the dead and the living, of matter and soul. He understood it instinctively, as though he had always known it. The language of the warp was the same as the pulse of his own essence, chaos restrained by will. As he listened, the air shimmered. The ground around him began to glow with threads of silver light. Energy, drawn not from machines, but from the psychic residue of the world itself. Fragments of broken souls, forgotten prayers, the dying will of warriors and saints, all of it flowed toward him. He absorbed their remnants, not to claim them, but to understand them, the pain, the devotion, the endless cycle of destruction and rebirth. He could feel every death this planet had suffered and every scream that had echoed into the void. "So much power," he murmured, "and none of it free." A faint smile touched his lips. He was not awed. He was not afraid. To him, this was simply potential, untamed energy waiting for purpose. He opened his hand. The light condensed, forming a small sphere, not of materia, but something purer. It pulsed in time with his heartbeat, faint at first, then stronger. The warp responded to him, harmonizing with his intent. For the first time, it obeyed. The air trembled. The flames bent toward him. The psychic winds began to move in unison with his breath. In that moment, Sephiroth became something the galaxy had never known. A mortal shaping the warp without corruption, without prayer, without madness. And from the depths of the Imperium, eyes watched. Demons whispered his name. Sorcerers across distant sectors felt a ripple in their rituals. Psykers screamed as their visions filled with silver light. He lowered his hand, the sphere dissolving into dust. The glow faded, but the world remained changed. The ashes on the ground settled, the air grew still, and the lingering warp storms retreated as though silenced by command. Sephiroth looked toward the horizon. The broken towers, the dying embers, the distant hum of machines struggling to live. "This universe," he said softly, "is a symphony that has forgotten its song." He turned away, Masamune glinting faintly in the pale firelight. "But I will teach it to remember." The world slept uneasily that night. Storms wandered across the horizon, heavy with ash and static. The air itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting for something it could not name. In the ruins of an ancient manufactorum beneath the skeletal remains of collapsed spires, Sephiroth found silence. The walls were scarred by centuries of war, metal bones fused with soot and rust. Still the faint pulse of machine spirits lingered, weak but alive, whispering prayers to long-dead engineers. He stepped into the darkness. His presence alone was enough to awaken the dormant lights. One by one, the fractured cogitators sparked, runes flickering like tired eyes opening after millennia. Hololithic diagrams hovered weakly in the air, fragments of blueprints, weapon schematics, failed dreams of human ambition. Sephiroth studied them, running his hand across the faint glow of an ancient symbol, the sigil of the Adeptus Mechanicus. These humans had worshipped machines, treating science as faith, logic as liturgy. They had built their god from metal and ritual, but they had never understood the essence behind creation: will. He raised his hand, and the glow intensified. The dormant reactors beneath the floor began to hum, responding to his energy. He could feel the veins of the structure awakening, power flowing through dead conduits like blood returning to a corpse. In the center of the chamber stood a shattered containment field, a relic that once held something vast, now long gone. Around it, fragments of crystal lay scattered, faintly humming with psychic residue. Sephiroth knelt, touching one between his fingers. It pulsed weakly, recognizing him as kin, a fragment of materia corrupted by time and war. He smiled faintly. "Even here, your echo lingers," he whispered, power pretending to be divine. He closed his hand around the shard. Energy rippled outward, soft at first, then blinding. The fragment shuddered, melting into light that swirled up his arm, sinking into his veins like molten silver. The warp responded instantly, its currents bending around him, the storm outside halting mid-roar. Then came creation. Metal and light fused together in his palm. Threads of circuitry and psychic flame wove themselves into shape, obeying no law of technology or sorcery. It was something between both, an artifact born from his will alone. When the light faded, it hovered before him, a perfect sphere of black crystal suspended in a lattice of silver light, humming with deep, resonant power. Within it swirled fragments of the warp, controlled and contained, like a storm caught inside glass. He gazed upon it, and for a moment even he felt the weight of what he had made. Not the black materia he once knew, not destruction born of pride, but something new, refined, evolved. "The heart of nothing," he said softly, "a song with no beginning and no end." He closed his hand and the lattice tightened. forming a pulse of dark brilliance that beat like a second heart. The walls around him vibrated, the ancient machines awakening fully now. Servitors reactivating, engines spinning, mechanical prayers turning into screams as their limited minds failed to comprehend what they served. The forge world groaned, its broken towers rose slightly, pulled by invisible strings. The sound echoed through the wastelands like a cathedral's bell tolling across a graveyard. Sephiroth stood in the center of it all, his silver hair glinting against the flickering light, the new artifact floating at his side. He had no name for it, but its essence was clear, not destruction, not creation, control. The materia of this universe, he said, his voice calm but edged with certainty. The heart that bends the storm. The warp's winds howled in response. Even its gods turned their gaze toward him, sensing a power that neither served nor feared them. And in that moment, deep within the fabric of unreality, a name was whispered, a name the galaxy had not yet learned to fear. The Null Heart. Sephiroth turned away from the glowing forge, his creation drifting behind him like a shadow. The light dimmed, the machines fell silent, and the ruined world seemed to bow in quiet reverence. He looked toward the stars. "Let them come," he murmured. "The gods, the mortals, the machines, all will know the shape of will unbound." And somewhere, far beyond the warp's veil, something stirred. Something that recognized a new power had entered the game. The Null Heart pulsed softly at Sephiroth's side, a sphere of controlled darkness, whispering faintly like a heartbeat trapped in crystal. Around him, the ruins had gone quiet. Even the wind dared not move. Only the faint hum of the awakened forge lingered, echoing through broken halls like a prayer that had lost its god. But far beyond the veil of reality, others had heard. From the crimson tides of the warp, shapes began to gather. Formless at first, then taking shape from hatred, hunger, and fear. Demons, drawn by the scent of his creation, clawed their way through the thin seams between worlds. The air split open with a sound that was not thunder, but screaming metal. The first to emerge were creatures of rage, crimson hulks wreathed in smoke and blood. Khorne's hounds, their teeth forged from the bones of fallen champions, their eyes burning with war's eternal hunger. They charged across the ash, each step shaking the ground. Behind them came others, shadows that slithered through the air like serpents made of sorrow, things that spoke in laughter and sobs all at once, creatures that dripped poison and perfume in equal measure. The warp had sent its beasts to test him. Sephiroth turned slowly. His eyes glowed faintly, green fire reflecting the twisted shapes that surrounded him. The Null Heart rose beside him, spinning lazily, radiating a low, steady hum. "Curious," he said quietly. "They send monsters to measure what they cannot understand." A demon lunged, a giant of claws and iron sinew, swinging its blade with the weight of a tank. Sephiroth didn't move until the last instant. Then, with a motion so fast it seemed to split the air, he drew Masamune. A single line of silver light flashed. The creature froze mid-strike. Then, without sound, it disintegrated. Form, fury, and soul erased in one perfect stroke. The others hesitated. The warp recoiled. They had felt something impossible, not resistance, but absence. His power did not burn as the warp's did. It devoured nothing. It created nothing. It simply was, a calm that denied their chaos. But chaos does not retreat easily. Dozens more surged forward, howling in defiance. The sky tore open as wings of bone and fire blotted out the stars. Sephiroth stepped forward, his coat trailing behind him like the shadow of an eclipse. The Null Heart pulsed once. A shockwave erupted outward, silent, invisible, yet absolute. The demons dissolved mid-charge, their essence unmade, their names erased from the warp's memory. The storm they rode upon died in the same breath. When it was over, the world was still again. The only sign of battle was the faint shimmer of fading energy and the soft ring of his blade returning to rest. He looked into the horizon, where the sky still bled faint traces of the warp's retreat. "You worship power," he said softly, almost to himself. "But power without will is chaos, and chaos without will," he paused, eyes narrowing slightly, "is weakness." From the rift above, a distant roar echoed, not anger, but acknowledgement. Somewhere in the warp, the gods had felt his defiance. Their avatars had failed. And for the first time in countless ages, the Imperium hesitated. Sephiroth stood alone amidst the silence, Masamune gleaming in the dying light. The Null Heart circled him once before dimming, its task complete. He looked toward the stars with quiet certainty. "Let them send more," he said, his tone calm, unshaken. "The gods can bleed too." The words carried across the ash, through the wind, into the waiting void, and the warp itself seemed to shiver in answer. The warp seethed in silence after the annihilation of its demons. What had been a roar of infinite madness moments before now simmered with unease. Even the gods, who never agreed on anything, shared one thought: this thing does not belong. Sephiroth stood motionless, Masamune lowered, the blade still humming faintly from the energy it had just devoured. Around him, the air hung thick with residual ash and psychic smoke, curling upward like incense in a cathedral of ruin. The Null Heart pulsed once more, dimly, then quieted. A perfect imitation of control. In the echoing void beyond reality, the Chaos gods murmured. Khorne raged at the insult. Slaanesh whispered admiration. Tzeentch calculated and failed. Even Nurgle's laughter faltered, caught between amusement and fear. Sephiroth lifted his gaze to the horizon. The shadows moved there, not demons this time, but mortals. Chaos warbands, drawn to the psychic flare that had rippled across the sector, marched toward him. Their banners, stitched with symbols of madness, flapped against the burning wind. At their head walked a Chaos Lord, clad in jagged armor blackened by centuries of conquest, his helm adorned with the eight-pointed star. Around him, hundreds of corrupted Astartes advanced in lockstep, their bolters aimed skyward. They had seen the silver figure from afar, standing amidst the corpses of demons, and believed him a rival champion, or perhaps a god made flesh. They sought to claim his power in the only way Chaos understood, through blood. The Chaos Lord raised his chainsword high. "You dare stand before the chosen of the dark gods, kneel, or be offered to the warp." Sephiroth turned toward him, calm, unhurried. His expression did not change. "Chosen," he repeated softly, almost with pity. "You are slaves wearing crowns." The Lord roared and charged, his warriors following, their boots pounding against the cracked earth like thunder. For a heartbeat, the air filled with the roar of engines, bolter fire, and fury. Then silence. Sephiroth moved once. A ripple spread through the air like a distortion of light, and everything stopped. The Chaos Lord froze mid-stride, his armor groaned. Cracks spread across its surface, glowing faintly from within. One by one, his warriors followed, their weapons disintegrating, their screams trapped behind helmets that no longer obeyed. A sound like glass breaking filled the battlefield. Then, as one, the entire warband shattered, not into flesh and blood, but into fragments of black dust that dissolved into the wind. When the last echo faded, Sephiroth stood alone again. His coat fluttered softly. The Masamune gleamed, He looked at the empty horizon where once stood an army, then at the null heart floating quietly beside him. "Faith," he said, his voice quiet but cutting through the air, "is the weakness of those who fear their own strength." The warp rippled, disturbed once more. Even its gods seemed to draw back, uncertain whether to strike or to watch. For the first time in uncounted millennia, chaos had found something it could not seduce, threaten, or destroy. And, as Sephiroth turned and began to walk again, the galaxy itself seemed to hold its breath. Beyond mortal sight, deep within the infinite nightmare of the warp, the great powers of chaos turned their gaze toward the material realm. What they saw was not a demon, not a god, not even a creature of their making. They saw something they did not create, and that alone was enough to draw their ire. From his throne of brass and bone, Khorne stirred. Rivers of blood boiled beneath his feet as he clenched his burning fist. "This interloper defies my legions," he growled, his voice a storm of violence that shook entire realms. "He kills my chosen without offering their skulls to me. He takes war and gives it no meaning. He must die." The words became law in that crimson dimension. Across countless battlefields in real space, warriors of Khorne roared in unison, feeling the echo of their god's anger. Yet even as his rage thundered, another god watched with a different kind of interest. In the shifting labyrinth of fate, Tzeentch laughed, a sound that echoed in spirals, never the same twice. "You see a threat," he said, his many voices overlapping. "I see opportunity. Something has entered the pattern that even I did not foresee. He moves without threads, no past, no prophecy. He breaks causality itself." His avian form rippled and changed, colors melting into impossible shades. "Perhaps I should let him live long enough to see how the game ends." From her domain of pleasure and pain, Slaanesh leaned forward, her smile both beautiful and cruel. "He is art," she whispered. "Such poise, such control. The way he cuts through reality, perfection without desire, dominance without indulgence. If I cannot own him—" Her eyes narrowed, voice soft as silk and venom. "Then I will make him crave me." And in the rotting gardens where life and death intertwined, Nurgle chuckled warmly, his tone like a grandfather's sigh. "Oh, children always chasing the storm, let him be. Even the brightest flame burns out. I will greet him in time, as I greet all things. Decay is patient." The gods fell into argument, their vast realms trembling with the clash of divine will. None could agree, not on his nature, not on his purpose. But all were bound by one truth. Sephiroth's existence defied them. In the heart of the warp, even the daemon Primarchs felt the ripple. Abaddon, aboard his warship, Eternity's End, stared into the flickering hololith that showed a silver figure cutting through a sea of corrupted soldiers. "A new weapon," he muttered, "or a new god pretending to be one." His claw flexed, and for the first time in centuries, there was something behind his anger. Hesitation. Magnus the Red, the Crimson King, looked up from his fortress of sorcery and frowned. His single eye shimmered with arcane light. "No," he whispered, "not a god, not a demon, something older, a will untainted." Across the galaxy, among the fallen and the faithful alike, prophets began to dream. Some saw a man with silver hair walking through oceans of fire. Others heard a voice, calm and resonant, saying only one thing: "The gods you worship are afraid." In the Imperium, silence fell for a moment. The warp itself, that infinite sea of screaming souls, paused, if only for a heartbeat. And from that silence, a truth emerged. For the first time since their birth, the Lords of Chaos had met something that did not belong to their endless war, something beyond their reach. and though they would never admit it, not to mortals, not to each other, even gods can feel fear. The warp roiled like a living sea, its tides of madness thrown into disarray. Never before had the great powers hesitated. They were chaos incarnate, impulse given form, yet now a single being of order had bent their storm. Across the aeons-old palaces of their realms, their servants felt the tremor ripple through their essence. Demon princes halted mid-battle, warpsmiths stopped their rituals. Even the greatest of champions, beings who had knelt before their gods for millennia, felt something they could not name: doubt. In the mortal galaxy, the reverberation manifested in subtle ways. Sorcerers woke screaming from dreams of silver light. Cults dedicated to the ruinous powers began to fracture, their prophets uttering conflicting visions. Some spoke of a savior, others of an executioner, and a few whispered of a mirror, a thing that reflected the very soul of the warp back upon itself. In the depths of the Eye of Terror, Abaddon the Despoiler paced aboard his flagship, Vengeance of Damnation. The ship's walls hummed with the screams of its bound demons. His lieutenants knelt before him, their armor wreathed in black flame. "My lord," rasped one, "the gods are divided, their whispers contradict, their blessings fade, something walks between them." Abaddon's claw flexed, the talon of Horus dripping with residual warp fire. "I have fought beneath their gaze for 10,000 years, he said. "Never have they faltered. If even they tremble, then this Sephiroth is no mere pretender." He turned toward the viewing port, staring into the endless crimson storms of the eye. His voice dropped to a growl. "Find him!" Far away, within a hidden world of glass and flame, the sorcerer Ahriman meditated atop a pyramid of obsidian. His mind reached through the warp's layers, searching the name now whispered in every current. When he found it, his concentration broke. The air itself cracked, glass shattering beneath the force of his shock. "What I have seen," he whispered, "should not exist." His rubric marines, ever silent, turned their eyeless helms toward him. "He moves beyond fate," Ahriman continued, staring into the infinite. "The warp bends, and yet he is not of it. Even destiny has no hold over him." And somewhere deeper still, hidden within the blackest heart of chaos, the gods themselves watched. Khorne's fury had become quiet. He no longer roared. He waited. Slanesh's smile had vanished. Her gaze sharpened to a hunter's focus. Tzeentch shifted endlessly, his plans rewriting themselves with each passing second, yet never finding an outcome that contained the Silver One. And Nurgle simply sighed, his laughter fading into a slow, uneasy hum. They had seen many champions, many usurpers, mortals and immortals who dreamed of replacing them. But this was something new. This being did not challenge their thrones. He ignored them completely. To the gods of chaos, that indifference was worse than rebellion. In the material realm, Sephiroth stood on a ridge of scorched glass, the broken planet spread below him. His coat rippled in the heat. He could feel their eyes upon him. 4 ancient presences watching from beyond existence. He did not speak to them, but his thoughts brushed against the veil. "If you are gods," he said calmly, "then prove it." For a moment, the warp itself flared. Fire, laughter, fury, and song merging into one impossible scream. Then it fell silent again, shamed by its own outburst. Sephiroth smiled faintly. "Just as I thought," he murmured. Noise. He turned his gaze back to the stars, where 1,000 worlds burned in the name of these so-called gods. A faint glimmer passed through his eyes. Not mercy, not anger, but something more dangerous. Understanding. He now knew what this galaxy truly was, a playground of mad deities and desperate mortals, both enslaved by belief. And so he decided, if the gods of this universe ruled through chaos, then he would bring them silence. The warp storms subsided, though their silence was no comfort. It was the kind of calm that follows a wound too deep to bleed. Every echo of thought, every flicker of psychic energy across the galaxy seemed to carry his name now, whispered not in worship, but in warning. On distant worlds, priests of the Emperor heard it in their prayers and tore out their tongues. Daemon princes heard it in their dreams and woke screaming. Even the Eldari, far beyond the reach of man, felt the tremor ripple through the webway. A cold awareness that something had entered reality that even their far-seeing gods had not predicted. The universe had been perfectly balanced in its madness, the Imperium and the warp forever locked in their endless cycle of hate. But now there was a third rhythm beating through creation, one that was neither holy nor heretical, one that stood alone. Sephiroth. He walked between gods and mortals, untouched by either. Where he passed, the warp's storms folded inward, collapsing into stillness. Where he looked, the veil between real space and the immaterium grew thin, not torn but stilled, as if the cosmos itself bowed to his will. The chaos. Gods withdrew to their thrones, silent in thought. The Inquisition hid there, fear behind faith and fire, and the galaxy waited, unsure whether the figure who had silenced the warp would bring salvation or the end. Sephiroth raised his gaze to the endless stars. The Masamune shimmered faintly at his side, catching the dim glow of a dying sun. "I see now," he said softly, his voice calm against the wind. "This universe is not alive, it is a wound, and everything that crawls within it has forgotten how to heal." He turned his back to the horizon, cloak flowing like smoke behind him. "Then let me remind them." And with that quiet vow, the silver angel began his journey deeper into the stars, unaware that his next steps would awaken the attention of something far older than the gods of chaos themselves. For far across the Imperium, beneath the silent golden halls of terror, a flicker of thought stirred in the mind of the Emperor. A single word whispered across eternity. Interesting. In the silent heart of terror, beneath a mountain of golden armor and endless machinery, the Emperor of mankind stirred. His body remained still upon the golden throne, but his mind was a storm without beginning or end. For 10,000 years he had endured the agony of eternity, his thoughts spread across 1,000,000 worlds, guiding the Imperium by will alone. But now, amid that ceaseless psychic hum, a new note had entered the song of the galaxy. Cold, perfect, deliberate. A vibration that did not belong to the warp, nor to any mortal soul. He felt it first, as a tremor across the Astronomicon, a subtle flicker that rippled through the guiding light that sustained his empire. For a brief moment, the beacon faltered, as if reality itself had paused to listen. The Emperor's consciousness focused, narrowing upon the source. Through the warp, through the chaos, through a storm of screaming souls and unending corruption, he saw it, a single silver figure walking across a battlefield of ash, unhurried, unbound. He watched Sephiroth move, and the warp moved around him. Not as a servant, not as an enemy, but as if it feared to touch him. That alone made the Emperor's thoughts sharpen into something close to curiosity. Across the palace halls of the silent custodians, alarms flared through the psychic channels. The Emperor's faint pulse of awareness had spread like wildfire among the few psychers who could still sense his will. In the vaults below, a council of the High Lords of Terror assembled in haste. Vox channels filled with static prayers. "The throne has stirred," one whispered. "He has seen something."
"What?"
asked another, voice shaking.
"A demon! A Xenos god!"
No one answered, because far above them, within the web of golden energy that surrounded the Emperor's broken form, his mind had reached beyond the edge of the galaxy. He had seen wars, gods, and empires rise and fall. But this presence, was different. It was not of this creation. He felt no malice in it. No hunger, no faith, only purpose. Through the Imperium, his voice whispered, not words, but thought made fire. "Who are you?" Across the void, Sephiroth paused. His eyes turned skyward, faintly glowing with Mako's light. For the first time since his arrival, he felt another will, ancient, vast, and unyielding, a mind that had ruled humanity for millennia. He spoke softly, though no air carried his words. Another king on a dying throne. And the Emperor, half man, half god, understood. He sensed no challenge in the tone, no reverence either, only recognition. Two beings born to shape destiny, each weary of the chains that power demanded. The golden light surrounding the throne flickered. Somewhere, in the depths of the warp, the Chaos God screamed in unison. The Emperor's awareness flared, his light burning across the Imperium for the briefest instant. An instinctive defense, a declaration of sovereignty. And yet through it all, Sephiroth stood unshaken. The psychic fire washed over him like a warm breeze, and when it passed, he smiled faintly. "You see," he whispered into the void, his words carried on, thought alone. "You command through belief. I command through will. We are not the same." The Emperor's light dimmed again, returning to its eternal vigil, but his thoughts lingered. Somewhere deep within that dying god's mind, beneath the weight of 10,000 years of duty, a single thought flickered like a dying ember. Perhaps this is what comes after me. And as that realization faded into silence, the warp trembled once more. For the first time in an age, two wills, one divine, one alien, had looked upon each other across eternity. Neither bowed, neither broke. And the galaxy itself held its breath, waiting to see which one would move first. Far across the galaxy, in the scarlet storms of the Cadian Gate, war never ended. It could not. The eye of terror bled endlessly into real space, spewing demons and traitor fleets into the fortress worlds that had stood as humanity's shield for 10,000 years. Now Cadia was little more than wreckage and memory, a wound upon reality where the warp and the material met and refused to separate. The planet's shattered remains drifted in orbit around the madness of the eye, its broken crust crackling with residual psychic fire. But something stirred among the ruins. The surviving Imperial ships that still clung to orbit detected a ripple, faint, elegant, deliberate. It was not warp energy, yet it cut through the immaterium like a blade through silk. Then a figure appeared upon the largest fragment of Cadia's corpse. His descent was silent, the void bending around him like a curtain of light. When his boots touched the cracked stone of what had once been Casa Mirak, even the warp winds stilled. Sephiroth stood upon the grave of humanity's greatest fortress world. Below him, rivers of molten rock flowed through what had once been city streets. The bones of titans jutted from the crust, like monuments to futility. The sky above was an unending storm of crimson fire, pulsing with the gaze of 1,000 demons, watching, waiting, uncertain. He looked upon the ruin, his expression unreadable. "This is what faith builds," he murmured, and what faith destroys. For a moment, his voice echoed, not through air, but through memory. Cadia remembered the screams, the artillery, the prayers shouted into static before the world cracked apart. All of it lingered in the psychic residue of the battlefield. Sephiroth raised his hand. The air shimmered. 1,000 fragments of broken metal, shattered weapons, and ruined armor rose from the ground like dust caught in sunlight. Each piece carried the remnants of a soul, the echo of a soldier who had died believing. "You fought," he said softly, "for gods who never came." The fragments gathered in the air before him, orbiting in graceful arcs, their movements forming patterns that resembled constellations. The warp's energy recoiled from it, as if purity itself offended it. And then they began to glow. One by one, the fragments dissolved into light, the trapped remnants within them finally released, the air filled with faint whispers, not of fear, but of relief. For the first time in 10,000 years, the souls of Cadia's fallen began to rise, freed from the prison of eternal war. Far above, in the eye of terror, the gods roared in fury. Corner bellowed, his voice shaking the void.
"He steals my slaughter!"
Slanesh hissed, with venomous delight.
"He gives them peace! How disgusting!"
Tzeentch muttered, furious yet fascinated.
"He changes destiny without permission."
Even Nurgle paused his laughter, his tone suddenly cold.
"He unravels the cycle."
Across the ruins the remaining demons shrieked and surged forth, their forms erupting from the rivers of fire, fanged beasts of shadow and flame, desperate to reclaim the souls being taken from them. Sephiroth turned, and Masamune flashed. There was no rage in his movement, no urgency. He moved with the precision of inevitability. His blade sang through the air, and every strike unmade the fabric of corruption itself. Each demon he felled did not die. It ceased to be. No essence, no echo, no rebirth. The warp recoiled again, the storm dimming, its color bleeding into ash. The demons faltered, the air grew cold, and when it was done, Sephiroth stood alone once more, surrounded only by silence and light. The fragments of Cadia's souls had vanished into the stars, carried beyond the warp's reach. He lowered his weapon, its edge glowing faintly with the residue of erased nightmares. "War is not eternal," he said, his voice calm and distant. "It endures only because you refuse to end it." The gods heard him, and in that moment they understood. This was not a conqueror. This was something worse. A judge. The light faded. The planet's remains drifted quietly through the void, untouched by warp storms for the first time since its fall. And in the distant reaches of the galaxy, where demons whispered of omens and saints wept in visions, one name began to spread like fire through scripture and fear alike, the Silver Angel, the being who brought silence to hell. The name began as a whisper, uncertain, fractured, born in the mouths of the dying, but whispers have power in a galaxy built on faith. It began on Cadia's ruins, where a drifting Imperial ship received a final message before its Vox systems went silent. A voice, soft yet clear, speaking across the static. The Silver Angel walks and the warp bends. The crew dismissed it as madness, but when their astropaths tried to send it onward, something strange happened. The signal multiplied. It echoed through the Imperium, carried on currents no mortal could trace. By the time it reached the next sector, it had already become a prophecy. Within weeks, entire systems were repeating it. Some whispered it as hope, others as a curse. Among the Astra Militarum, it became a story told in trenches between battles. A warrior came from the stars, they said, not daemon, not man. He walks where gods dare not tread. On shrine worlds, priests denounced it as heresy, even as their flocks painted wings of silver upon the walls of burned temples. The ecclesiarchy declared it blasphemy, yet their sermons carried a tremor of fear. For in their dreams the emperor's light shimmered, not gold, but silver, and in the warp demons whispered it like a wound they could not close. The silver angel, the one who silenced screams, the one who unmade faith. Even the Eldari took notice. In the crystal halls of Ulthwé, Farseer Eldrad Ulthran stood before the Infinity Circuit, his eyes clouded with visions. "Something has entered the song," he murmured. "A note that does not belong." "What kind of note?" asked one of the warlocks. Eldrad turned slowly. "A perfect one." Meanwhile, in the cold void between stars, Sephiroth walked unseen, crossing systems not by ship, but by will. He did not need to travel. The warp itself moved around him. Wherever he went, its storms parted, and its demons fled. On worlds torn by eternal war, he appeared like a ghost descending from the sky amidst bombardment and fire. To some he brought stillness, to others death, to all he brought silence. When orcs saw him, they called him Dar, Silent Boss, and their war bands broke apart, confused and terrified, fighting each other instead. When Chaos warlords beheld him, their weapons melted in their hands as their gods turned away in shame. When the Sisters of Battle prayed for deliverance, they saw his shadow cross the smoke, and their hymns faltered, because they felt no faith within him, only truth. Across 1,000 worlds, one truth became undeniable. Wherever the Silver Angel walked, the war stopped, not through peace, not through mercy, but through awe. He was not savior nor destroyer. He was the stillness that followed both. And so, the Imperium tried to claim him. The Inquisition declared a new order, the Ordo Sepulchra, charged with finding the Silver Angel and uncovering his nature. Some said he was a new emperor, born of light and war. Others believed him the end of all gods. But Sephiroth cared for neither. He looked upon the galaxy and saw the same mistake repeating. Mortals worshipping war, gods feeding on worship, faith devouring truth, truth becoming myth. In the shadow of a dead moon, he stood alone and whispered, "They give names to everything they fear." He looked skyward, his reflection shimmering in the curve of Masamune's blade. "Let them call me what they wish." The blade sang quietly in the wind. "I am not their angel." For the Imperium, there is no mystery that does not demand blood. The moment the first reports of the Silver Angel reached Terra, the Inquisition stirred like a nest of serpents. Across the stars, encrypted orders rippled through the black channels of the Ordo Sepulchra, a newly sanctioned order born from panic and faith. Its creed was simple: find him, name him, end him. The High Lords of Terra could not agree on what he was. Some called him a psychic echo of the Emperor, others a new Xenos god in human form. But the Inquisition needed no agreement. They needed only suspicion. At the heart of the hunt stood Inquisitor Tserin Valanthe, a woman of cold eyes and colder purpose. Her ship, the Blade of Truth, cut through the void toward the Sigoris subsector, where a dozen systems had gone silent, each last transmission ending with the same 3 words: "He is here." Her voice carried across the Vox chambers, calm and unwavering. "Deploy the Psychers, seal the astropaths. I want the warp mapped within every kilometer of this sector. If he can be found, he will be." But finding Sephiroth was not like finding a heretic or a demon. Wherever he walked, the warp itself refused to speak. Psychic readings turned to static. Prophecies ended mid-verse. Even the Emperor's Tarot, that sacred deck of divine truth, drew only blank cards. Saren Valanthe stood before her data screens, watching endless streams of corrupted information, her hands clenched behind her back. "He hides in plain sight," she murmured. "He is not unseen. He is ignored by reality itself." Then came the first encounter. On the ash world of Belisar Nai, an inquisitorial task force cornered a silver figure amidst a storm of lightning and glass. Dozens of stormtroopers advanced, bolters raised, prayers spilling from their lips. They fired. The bolts never reached him. Each shell slowed, stilled, and unraveled mid-air, dissolving into harmless light. Sephiroth did not even move. He only looked at them, and one by one they lowered their weapons. Not from command, not from fear, but from understanding. They simply could not imagine harming him. Saren herself arrived moments later, her rosette blazing with authority. "Identify yourself," she demanded. "By order of the Inquisition, you will answer for the disruption of the Emperor's peace." Sephiroth turned toward her, his eyes reflecting neither defiance nor obedience. Only calm. "I bring peace," he said softly. "You bring noise." And before her could command her forces, he vanished. Not into the warp, but into silence itself. No light, no sound, no trace. Only the faint whisper of his words remained, echoing in her mind long after. "You seek to judge the infinite with finite eyes." For weeks afterward, her reports were dismissed as madness. The Inquisition does not tolerate failure, and yet they could not punish her. For every Inquisitor who heard her account dreamed of the same thing that night. A silver-haired figure standing before the throne of terror, the Emperor's light dimming beneath his shadow. The Ordo Sepulchre grew desperate. Fleets were dispatched. Exterminatus orders were prepared for worlds he had simply walked upon, yet every purge ended the same way. No remains, no witnesses, no survivors. Only stillness, spreading system by system like a plague of serenity. Sephiroth had become more than a fugitive. He was now a paradox, a silence the Imperium could not kill. And in that silence the galaxy began to listen. There are places in the galaxy where even the warp dares not breathe, black voids where faith and madness find no purchase. These are the pariah worlds, realms untouched by the Imperium, where psychers go mad from absence and demons fade like smoke in a vacuum. It was here that Sephiroth went. He crossed the border between life and silence as easily as stepping through mist. The storms of the warp folded behind him, and in their place came stillness. Vast, perfect, infinite. His boots touched the surface of a dead world, a sphere of obsidian and ice orbiting a lightless sun. The planet had no name, only a designation lost to Imperial records, Null 47. No life, no wind, no sound. It was a grave of gods, a void so empty that even time seemed reluctant to pass. Sephiroth stood at its heart and closed his eyes. For the first time since his arrival, he felt something familiar, the quiet, the peace, the utter lack of interference. "This," he whispered, "is what the universe should be." He walked through canyons carved by forgotten cataclysms, past the remnants of monoliths and shrines built by races long erased. Their symbols spoke of fear, fear of the warp, fear of eternity, fear of noise. He traced his fingers along the stone, understanding their truth. They had not been destroyed by war, they had chosen silence. The deeper he walked, the more the planet responded. Beneath the crust, vast structures hummed with faint energy, not mechanical, not psychic, but something older, resonant. He followed it downward until he reached a chamber, the size of a city, carved into the planet's heart. Its walls glimmered faintly with black crystal, and in the center stood a single spire. Tall, flawless, alive. He placed a hand upon it. The crystals sang, not with sound, but with memory. Images flared across his mind, a race of beings, cold and brilliant, who had turned their backs on the warp and all its false gods, machines of living metal, minds like stars, the Necron tier. And within that vision he saw something buried deeper still, a will that slept beneath the planet's skin, vast and patient, a god machine dreaming in the dark. Sephiroth smiled faintly. Even your silence has an architect. From the crystal's depths a voice emerged, cold, perfect, ancient beyond measure. You are not of this galaxy. He did not flinch, and you are not of life. You bring stillness, the voice said. We understand stillness. I bring balance, Sephiroth answered, a world where chaos cannot feed. There was a long pause, then a whisper like stone grinding upon stone. Then perhaps we are not enemies. The crystal pulsed once, faintly like a heartbeat awakening after millennia. Around him the air began to hum, and the ground trembled as ancient systems stirred. He turned and began to walk away. Sleep until you are needed, he said quietly. Your war is not yet over. As he ascended, the energy behind him dimmed again, retreating into hibernation. But deep within the core of Null 47, the signal spread, through buried conduits, through tomb worlds forgotten by time. And across the void, on distant dead planets, green eyes began to open. The Necrons had heard the call of the Silver Angel, not as slaves, not as enemies, but as listeners, drawn to the one being whose purpose mirrored their own, the silencing of chaos. Above Null 47, the stars shimmered faintly as Sephiroth rose into orbit. He gazed upon the endless void, the cold perfection of a universe without prayer or corruption. And for a moment he allowed himself a rare thought. Not ambition, not conquest, but something close to peace. The galaxy is waking, he murmured, but not all life deserves to wake. Deep within the frozen tombs of forgotten worlds, the stars themselves seemed to shiver. For millennia, the Necrons had slept. Silent kings in catacombs of blackened steel, dreaming of empires that had turned to dust. Their time had not yet come. Their wars were long past. But something had changed. It began as a pulse, faint, silver, and alien. It moved not through space, but through the fabric of existence itself. It was not the call of the Citan nor the reawakening protocols of a tomb world. It was something older, a frequency of will. One by one, the Necron stasis chambers flickered to life. Cryptech networks flared, relays sparked, command hierarchies reignited. The dead began to rise. On Somnus Prime, an entire dynasty stirred beneath the black sands. On Tyreth's halo, monoliths erupted from glaciers, shedding aeons of frost. Across the void, thousands of tomb worlds awoke, their machine minds murmuring the same signal, the same phrase that none could translate: the angel walks. In the throne chamber of a world-sized tomb, the overlord Imhotep the Stormlord opened his eyes for the first time in 60 million years. His gaze burned with emerald light as he stepped down from his dais, lightning crackling along the edges of his armor. He turned toward his cryptech. "Report." The cryptech's mechanical voice buzzed with static. "An external frequency has breached the interdimensional silence. It is not of Necron origin, my lord. It carries purpose." "Purpose?" Imhotep's voice was low and cold. "Not signal." "Purpose," the cryptech repeated, "and control. The lesser dynasties are already moving to respond." Imhotep's optics narrowed. "Then so shall we." He looked toward the stars, toward the direction of the pariah worlds where the signal had begun. He felt it even now, faintly, like a whisper across eternity. A mind that moved without fear, without worship, without the corruption of soul. For the first time in countless ages, the Stormlord felt curiosity. "Who dares wake the dead and command the silence?" he asked. Across the galaxy, other dynasties answered the same question with movement. Legions of Necron warriors rose in perfect formation. Obelisks ignited, their green cores humming to life. The void filled with the cold shimmer of awakening fleets. Sephiroth had not meant to summon them. He had not called their names, nor sought their allegiance. Yet his very essence, his rejection of chaos, his dominion over will, had resonated with them like a forgotten hymn. The Necrons saw in him not a god, but a mirror, a being who sought the same perfection they once craved, order unmarred by decay. And as their fleets began to stir, their collective will reached out, not in worship, but in acknowledgement. Far above Null 47, Sephiroth felt it, a chorus of minds awakening, cold and ancient, yet pure in their precision. He looked toward the void and smiled faintly. "So the dead remember," he whispered. In the warp, the gods screamed in fury. Every world that awoke in silver light was a world that fell silent to their influence. Every tomb that stirred was a temple that no longer prayed. For every demon that was born, a Necron rose, and where the dead walked, the warp died. The galaxy trembled between two truths, chaos without end and silence without mercy. Sephiroth stood at the center, the quiet fulcrum upon which eternity began to tilt. He drew Masamune, its blade glinting with reflected starlight. "The gods built a universe of madness," he said, his voice soft yet vast. "I will build one of order." And from the black tomb worlds below, the Necrons answered in their own tongue, a soundless vow carried on light. "We will follow the silence." The galaxy had forgotten what stillness sounded like. For 10,000 years, every corner of creation had echoed with the same chorus: bolter fire, screaming demons, sermons of hate. But then the Necrons stirred, and beside them walked Sephiroth. They did not march with banners or trumpets. They advanced like a tide of inevitability. From the pariah worlds outward, the war of silence began. Where the Imperium brought faith, they brought quiet. Where chaos brought madness, they brought null. Where life clung to noise, they brought the mercy of absence. The first to fall was Tirith's Reach, a world consumed by endless cult wars. Its skies were choked with the smoke of heretics, and its cities bled with sacrifice. When the silver ships of the Necrons appeared above the horizon, the cultists rejoiced, believing new gods had come to claim them. Then the sky dimmed, no fire, no thunder, just the fading of sound itself. Daemons screamed and vanished, their summoners collapsing into stillness. The air lost its echo, the ground ceased to tremble, and for the first time in its history, Tyrath's Reach fell silent. Sephiroth descended amidst the aftermath. Masamune rested loosely at his side. He did not speak, he only looked. The surviving mortals fell to their knees, unable to decide if he was savior or executioner. He regarded them quietly. "There is peace," he said, "when there is nothing left to fight for." The next system fell without resistance, the next without life. The war of silence spread like an infection, not through conquest, but through the removal of conflict itself. The Necrons called it restoration, the Imperium called it annihilation, but both were wrong. To Sephiroth, it was balance. Across the stars, resistance formed. Chaos fleets, orc warbands, imperial crusades, all converging upon the growing dead zone. Yet every battle ended the same way. No explosions, no screams, only the sudden collapse of sound and fury into perfect stillness. In the depths of the warp, the gods of chaos howled in desperation. Every world Sephiroth touched was a wound to them, every silence a grave for their power. Slanesh sent hosts of demons wrapped in beauty and agony. Khorne unleashed his greatest champions, worlds worth of rage embodied in flesh and metal. Tzeentch spun labyrinths of fate, weaving traps of paradox and prophecy, but none could find him. The warp itself forgot him wherever he passed. And so the gods turned to their last weapon, belief. They whispered to mortals, shaping cults in his name. Worship the silver angel, they said. Feed him the devotion that will make him ours. But Sephiroth felt it immediately. He stood upon a world of ruins, surrounded by men and women chanting his name in trembling reverence. He raised his hand, and all fell silent. Their words froze in their throats, their eyes emptying as the false faith was erased from their minds. "I will not be your god," he said. "I will not be theirs." And the people, stripped of illusion, wept, not in fear, but in clarity. For the first time, they saw their universe as it truly was, a place without saviors, without monsters, only choices. The Necrons advanced ever onward, cleansing systems of psychic corruption and warp resonance, their star maps expanding in rings of quiet light. Entire sectors disappeared from the Imperial record. Vox signals went dark. Even the Emperor's Astronomicon flickered where Sephiroth's influence spread. The Inquisition called it the Great Dimming. The Chaos Gods called it blasphemy. But the stars themselves began to call it something else, equilibrium. And as the galaxy teetered, on the edge of order and oblivion, a final ripple moved through the warp, not of anger, but of awakening. For deep in the dark beyond light, something vast and ancient had heard the silence spreading. Something that had slept since before gods, before war, before life itself. And its hunger was endless. In the uncharted dark between galaxies there are things older than memory, remnants of creation itself. There, among the debris of dead stars and forgotten gods, something vast turned its gaze toward the galaxy. It had no name in mortal tongues, but the ancients had whispered one before silence claimed them all. Unicron. Where Primus had forged worlds of order, Unicron devoured them. Where gods made meaning, he consumed it. His hunger was not for flesh or matter, but existence itself. He slept for eons wrapped in the hollow shell of a dead planet. But now he stirred. For the first time in eternity, the warp's song had gone quiet. And in that quiet he heard something that no being had ever dared to create: balance. He detested it. In the darkness, fragments of his vast form began to move. Plates of continental size groaned and shifted. Rings of metal turned like the grinding of ancient worlds. His single, molten eye opened, flooding the void with orange fire. "The silence spreads," his voice thundered across dimensions. "The feast returns." He rose, a planet reborn in hatred, a god of consumption awakened by peace. The stars dimmed as his gravity stretched across the void, pulling dead moons into his orbit and crushing them to dust. Far away, Sephiroth felt it. Standing upon a world of glass and steel, one of the first Necron forges restored, he turned his gaze upward. The stars flickered, the void trembled. Something vast was approaching, older and hungrier than the warp itself. "This presence," he murmured, "it is not chaos, it is void made will." The Necron cryptex detected it next. Across their command matrices, equations shattered. Readings turned to impossible values. Imhotep himself felt the pull of dread, an emotion his kind had not known in ages. "This is no demon," he said. "This is annihilation given form." And indeed it was. Unicron entered the galactic rim, his shadow consuming. Entire systems, worlds trembled and disintegrated as his gravitational field reached them. The warp flared in panic, demons howling as their feeding grounds vanished into nothing. The Chaos Gods screamed, for they could not touch what Unicron destroyed. There was no death in his wake, no soul to claim, no essence to corrupt, only nothingness. And Unicron spoke again, his voice a rumble that rolled through the bones of reality. "You seek silence, Silver Angel. I bring the true end. Let us see whose peace endures." Sephiroth closed his eyes and felt the pull. His essence trembled against the weight of the void. Around him, the Necron armies looked to him not as master, but as equilibrium given flesh. "This one does not destroy for balance," he said softly. "It destroys because it exists. It devours truth itself." He looked skyward. Then, for the first time, Sephiroth drew Masamune not to end, but to defend. The stars brightened. The sword's silver edge gleamed, reflecting galaxies. "The silence was never meant for you," he said, "and you will not claim it." Far above, Unicron turned, an entire world bending toward one man. And so began a conflict that the galaxy could not name, a war between the stillness that preserved and the void that devoured, a war where peace itself had to learn how to fight. Unicron entered the galaxy like a storm that had forgotten mercy. Stars trembled in their orbits, moons cracked beneath invisible tides, the void itself seemed to scream as the ancient god machine unfolded its hunger across reality. He did not invade, he consumed. Entire systems vanished without warning. Planets imploded, their cores drawn into Unicron's titanic frame. Asteroid belts disintegrated into vapor, and every world that fell to him was erased, not conquered, not burned, but unmade. No souls reached the warp, no screams echoed through eternity. There was simply absence. The Chaos Gods recoiled. Khorne's rivers of blood evaporated, Slaanesh's symphonies went mute, Tzeentch's prophecies ended in blank pages, even Nurgle's gardens withered to dust. For the first time since their creation, they tasted true fear, the kind that could end even them. And in that spreading void of silence, Sephiroth moved. From world to world he walked through the wreckage, his silver hair glinting in the light of dying suns. Around him marched the Necrons, endless legions of metal and memory, their green eyes burning like funeral lamps in the dark. But even they hesitated before Unicron. For as the god approached, their systems faltered. Circuits dimmed, ancient programming broke under the weight of a hunger that consumed the very concept of life. From the command dais of the Necron tomb ship Silent Spear, Imhotep the Stormlord watched as Unicron's shadow crossed the void. "No force of logic or weapon of science can defy that," he said coldly. "What do we fight with when existence itself unravels?" Sephiroth's voice came quietly from the darkness behind him. "With what remains when all else is gone." He stepped forward, eyes reflecting Unicron's molten light. The great Devourer filled half the starscape, a world of machinery and hate, his surface shifting with towers, spines, and mechanical jaws the size of continents. Unicron's voice rolled through the void. "I know you now, Silver Angel, a shadow trying to teach silence, but silence is my domain." The stars themselves bent under the weight of his words. Sephiroth raised Masamune. Its edge gleamed with the reflection of galaxies, impossibly sharp, impossibly calm. "You confuse silence with nothingness," he said. "One is peace, the other is your corpse." Then the void exploded with motion. Unicron's surface erupted, launching waves of energy that could erase armies. Sephiroth moved, not in defiance of physics, but beyond it. One step became 1,000 kilometers. The next carried him into the upper atmosphere of the God Machine. He struck. Masamune met Unicron's armor, metal forged from the bones of stars. The impact sent shockwaves across the system, space itself fractured, light bending and folding like liquid. Unicron roared, his voice shaking planets. "You would wound a god." Sephiroth's gaze burned cold. "No, I will remind you what death sounds like." He leapt again, a flash of silver across an infinite body of black steel. Each swing carved reality open for a heartbeat, exposing raw starlight. Yet Unicron did not fall. Each wound sealed instantly, feeding on the energy of what it destroyed. Sephiroth realized the truth. Unicron consumed consequence. Every act against him strengthened him. Every motion, every struggle, every resistance fed the void.
"So be it,"
Sephiroth whispered. He stopped fighting. He sheathed Masamune and stood in perfect stillness, eyes closed, breath shallow. The void around him dimmed, the pull of gravity faltered, the hunger hesitated. For the first time in eternity, Unicron felt something alien, the absence of reaction. Sephiroth spoke, his voice soft and absolute. "You devour resistance, you feed on motion, then I will be still." Unicron's energy faltered, his vast mind rippled with confusion. The tides of destruction slowed. Across his form, light dimmed as the flow of devoured essence stilled. Because Sephiroth's will was no longer opposing him. It was simply refusing to exist within his law. "Impossible," Unicron growled. "You cannot deny me." But Sephiroth opened his eyes. Twin green stars against an ocean of black. "I already have." For the first time since creation, Unicron recoiled. His great eye dimmed. His voice, once thunder, became a tremor. The god that devoured worlds was no longer consuming. He was fading. And through that fading came something no one in the galaxy had ever heard before. Unicron's silence. Not the silence of death, but of defeat. Stars went dim. The galaxy itself seemed to pause, as if creation were holding its breath, watching two forces that no god could command. Unicron, the eternal devourer of worlds, faltered for the first time in his infinite existence. The fire in his core flickered. His colossal frame, built from the bones of galaxies, trembled beneath the weight of something he could not consume. Stillness. Sephiroth hovered before him, framed against the dying light of suns he had already swallowed. His eyes burned green, calm and terrible. Masamune hung loosely in his hand, a single sliver of light in the dark. "You were made to end things," Sephiroth said softly. "But even endings must have meaning." Unicron's voice shook the cosmos. "Meaning is a lie. Existence feeds me. I am truth." Sephiroth stepped forward through the void, his form cutting through Unicron's gravitational storms as though they were mist. "No, you are hunger. You exist because the universe allows you to." He raised his hand. Around him, space began to shimmer, not breaking, not burning, but folding into perfect symmetry. Stars aligned. Fractured light curved inward, drawn by a force older than gravity.
"You consume everything that lives," Sephiroth whispered. "Then I will give you what you cannot devour."
And then he let go. Not of his body, not of his will, but of his self. His being expanded, dissolving into pure consciousness, spreading across the void like a tide of light and stillness. For one timeless instant, he became silence incarnate. Unicron roared, the sound shaking galaxies. He opened his maw, a planet-sized wound of molten fire. and unleashed his full power. Beams of annihilation struck Sephiroth's light, tearing reality apart in concentric waves. But where the blasts passed, they found nothing to consume. Sephiroth had become what Unicron could not touch, a void without hunger, order without thought, a perfect counterweight. The two forces met, hunger and stillness, and the universe buckled. Stars went supernova in silence. Time fractured. Planets were erased from memory, their histories folded into a single moment of blinding equilibrium. And then, a heartbeat. In that heartbeat, Sephiroth's light condensed again, reforming his body. He stood upon a surface of molten metal, Unicron's own armor, as if it were merely stone beneath his boots. Masamune burned in his hand, no longer a blade, but a symbol of focus made visible. Unicron's single eye glared down at him, flickering. "You are nothing. You are a whisper against eternity." Sephiroth looked up, his voice quiet and final. "Exactly." He raised the sword one last time, and with a motion so simple it defied understanding, he drew a single line across the void. Light split. Unicron froze. A line of silver fire traced through his entire being, through every plate, every machine, every atom of his godhood. And for the first time in the history of the cosmos, the Devourer knew silence. The great machine convulsed once, then cracked apart. There was no explosion, no scream, only a quiet pulse, spreading outward, a ripple that restored what had been lost. The stars reignited, the void calmed, the warp fell still. And from the center of that calm, Sephiroth floated, his silver hair drifting in the newborn light. He looked around him, at the stars reborn, at the galaxies breathing again. "It is done," he said. But even as he spoke, he knew the truth. There is no end, only balance shifting from one side to another. He closed his eyes. Peace is not silence. Peace is the choice not to speak. And then he turned away from the stars. His body began to dissolve, not into death, but into memory, his form scattering into 1,000 threads of silver light. They drifted across the galaxy, weaving through the warp, through the heart of dying suns, through the dreams of mortals who would never know his name. Everywhere they passed, war paused for a breath. Every soldier hesitated, every god grew quiet, and somewhere, beyond the edge of the known universe, the faint whisper of his voice lingered, calm, certain, eternal. "I am not your savior. I am not your end. I am your stillness." The light faded, the stars burned on, and the galaxy, scarred, reborn, and momentarily at peace, remembered the day when the silver angel silenced even the gods,